G'day legends, I hope that you're having a great day. Now, today, as always, we're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to look at some news, some updates, we're going to look at some footage as well, some things that are geolocated, but of course, at the end then, we'll have a look at the maps and go over what we are seeing change and some shifts either way. So, yesterday I actually had a great conversation with a mate of mine who's actually over in Ukraine fighting. Now, we will do an interview in the next coming weeks, but we just need to sort a few bits out and wait on some time frame stuff. But he did tell me some very interesting things that he's allowed me to share with you. Now, you'll hear this a lot more in depth in a future interview as well. It will go along with some very awesome GoPro footage. But firstly, he spoke about the difference in units across the Russian military that they're up against, that there are some really good ones, some really shit ones, that the standards change dramatically from mobilised guys with poor training, poor equipment, to guys who are actually really switched on and know what they're doing, and that this can change very quickly with the rotation of soldiers on the front line. I can't say the location, but he's actually been fighting recently against the Chechen Special Forces a fair bit, and he speaks very, very highly of their capability and ability, saying, quote, Chechens on the AGS, the automatic grenade system, are really good. They are far better than us at target acquisition and speed of employment of the weapon system. It is really impressive. Now, this is something that you do not hear about the Chechens because their stereotype of the TikTok soldiers has definitely stuck, and for good reason in a lot of areas. Now, he's also spoken to me about working in areas against the Russian VDV paratroopers, saying, quote, those lads really know what they are fucking doing. Often they'll conduct very successful raids under night vision. Now, he will talk more on the specifics of this in a couple of weeks, but for now, that is all I can actually share with you. This was very fascinating as we hear very much the opposite. But we do know that the Russian military is structured, that training and funding to unit is dramatically different, and that has a number of reasons, even down to geographically where you're located. But the idea that all the Russian forces are merely conscripts or poorly trained soldiers is incorrect. And it also shows the battle that Ukraine has on its hands during and throughout this counter-offensive. Now, from reviewing some of the footage he's actually sent across to me, and yes, you'll see it in time, I can't share it yet, it does seem that the opposing force is using a lot of thermal sights on their weapons, as there is continuous accurate fire, even in a very camouflaged environment, and this fire maintains its accuracy whilst the guys are moving, even though they wouldn't be able to be seen, I guess, against the background with the camouflage. So that's something we'll talk about more as well. The use of that, use of the night fighting equipment of the VDV, as well as the AGS teams of the Chechen Special Forces. I hope that interests you, and yeah, you'll watch that with me too in a couple of weeks. Anyway, more footage has come out today from a Russian Ka-52, the Alligator helicopter, being downed by man-portable air defense, also known as man-pads. Now, some of this footage will be shared across my Telegram too, but let's show some stuff here. So we can see just at the very beginning here, you can see the man-pad just take off here and then flies out into the distance. It's like watching golf. I don't know how people know where the golf ball is in the air, and then you'll see a strike of a plume of smoke. There, and that is hitting the Ka-52 helicopter, and here is said to be another image of it grounded there. Now, it is reported that the pilot was able to eject and has survived, but the navigator has died. And this has been confirmed also by Russian sources. Now, Ukrainian sources claim they've downed another one of the Ka-52 around Bakhmut, but I haven't been able to find any other sources to actually confirm this. Now, these choppers, like anything, are susceptible to air-to-air and surface-to-air missiles and fire from the ground as well. But after initial huge losses, it does seem that Russia has worked out some of the kinks and tactics around using these choppers, and they've recently been used to more success, especially down near Uruzani and Robotyne direction. Now, I should say that that down chopper is in the Robotyne direction, but this again raises my question as to why there has been little to no talk about sending attack choppers to Ukraine. Like, no one really mentions it. And there are a lot of benefits to sending those. You know, you don't need runways, a very small footprint on the ground. They are significantly cheaper than fast air, things like that. There's just not really much talk about it. And now, especially with countries like Australia and Germany retiring attack helicopters in the next couple of years. So I thought that was something very interesting to talk about. I know I've gone over that in depth in another video. Now, something I did leave out yesterday was about the Sea Baby drone. I don't know how I missed this, but it carries 850 kilograms of explosives. What is a hell of a lot of bang. And we've talked a little bit before about these drones from some guys who have contacted me about some of these aerial systems, but the amount of bang actually does have a lot to do with how much fuel, therefore you need the range. So if they're going X amount of miles, they can put in more explosive or maybe less, but that is a hell of a lot of bang. Anyway, Geo confirmed, who does some great work, and congratulations, whoever's behind it, on reaching 100,000. I did see your post, but they have put up some very interesting bits and pieces. So I'll go over the post and then the video that went along with it. So Geo confirmed update. What a lot of people don't seem to understand, Ukraine has made the choice to go heads-on with the Russian military. Biggest protected axis, no surprise anymore. Russia knows where they are, and still Ukraine is gaining ground. Power v power. And what is he meaning? Well, where we're seeing is, if we can turn on then the defensive works of the Russians, then Ukraine is going head on with the Russians, the most heavily defended areas down from the south, down from Robertini to Tokmak, and heavily defended down from the south here as well from Uruzani. Now, of course, this doesn't look as heavily defended, but we don't know the specifics of the ground. As we see Ukraine advance, we'll talk more on the specifics there, but heavily defended areas going head to head. Speaking that, the war of attrition is on, and along with this has posted this of the artillery losses over the past month, and these are all bits and pieces of artillery, blue of course being Ukrainian, red of course being Russian. Now, of course, one thing to say with artillery is not every piece of artillery is equal. So if a brand new Caesar gets taken out, that is not equal to some old shitty fucking World War II 10 whatever millimeter fucking thing. But it is very interesting, and you can see that Russia has lost a significant amount more artillery systems in this region. Now, speaking of this war of then attrition, he released this video with it as well, which shows the losses and as well the border moving from here. So we see it cutting down, and this went along with the post showing that Ukraine is going into the most heavily defended areas here. And I did think that was very interesting, and these are all the bits that they have geo confirmed. So along with this, I think this intel update from the MOD somewhat made sense to put in here, but despite the consistent pressures of war, Ukrainian efforts to build up fuel stockpiles will likely be successful in ensuring that it will have sufficient fuel reserves during the approaching winter period. Ukraine has been effective in mobilising its mining sector to maintain output, ensuring a continuous supply of coal is available for thermal power and heating plants in the winter, and substantial gas stocks providing a further reserve. And we know that fuel was a big problem earlier in this war. And basically through all last year, civilians could only get 10, 15 litres of fuel because it needed to be saved then for the military. Of course, through winter years, more coal, more gas for heating. So this is being stockpiled as well. Despite Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure likely continuing this winter, Ukraine demonstrated last winter that it has the skilled workforce and expertise needed to operate and maintain the power network, even in wartime conditions. And we did see that Russia launched many assaults across the Ukrainian energy grid, and the grid was, definitely under a lot of pressure, and areas were blacked out for an amount of time, but Ukraine was able to get areas back online very quickly and maintain a lot of that electricity grid. Of course, electricity in a war is something that is a military target. It can be targeted because in this day and age of military equipment, so much equipment relies on then the electricity grid. So you can target electricity grid in warfare. We would do the exact same if we went into a war. But as people will say, well, could you then strike into Russia's as well? And we have seen many strikes across the border at certain areas of tactical significance too. So, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has come out again in public support of Ukraine choosing its own destiny, as NATO really tries to pad out some of the comments made by the potential territorial negotiations for Ukraine a few days ago. So let's look at what has been said. And this was from a Norwegian paper again. So the way to achieve this is to support Ukraine militarily. If you want a lasting, just peace, then military support for Ukraine is the way to get there. There is no doubt of that. it is Ukraine, and only Ukraine, that can decide when the prerequisites for negotiations are present, and who can decide around a negotiation table what is the acceptable solution. Our task is to support. Peace is not a matter of course. We should not be afraid, but aware that peace is not a given. Nuclear weapons exist, and Moscow and Putin use nuclear threats and rhetoric to try to divide us. It is no coincidence that we are talking about nuclear weapons. They want to scare us from supporting Ukraine. We'll talk about a little bit more about nukes and Belarus a bit later on. It is disappointing that we are still here. We have been living in a security policy free quarter that began when the Berlin Wall fell. So, of course, backing up that NATO says Ukraine is, fully in control of when negotiations start, how they start, who's at the table, what is going on. But just like I said in the video the other day, Ukraine is holding the steering wheel of this, but NATO ultimately is in the driver's seat of what happens. If NATO say jump, Ukraine has to say how high. Now, do I think that's fair? No, I think Ukraine should be able to decide their own destiny. But at the end of the day, if NATO is supplying all the weapons, money, funding, everything in now, that Ukraine is using less and less of their own stockpiles, there's a significant change has gone from Ukrainian Soviet stuff now a full shift, almost full shift over onto Western equipment. That at the end of the day, now NATO is sitting in the driver's seat. And publicly, yes, but behind closed doors, there will definitely be some influence where Ukraine definitely go with this. And that is just how it is going to happen from here. So good news for Ukraine. We talked about F-16s yesterday. We know they're still going to be a long time, but Washington has approved that F-16s can be sent to Ukraine from Denmark and the Netherlands once training has been then completed. Now, we know America does have the final say on a lot of military hardware being sent into Ukraine. Now, they own the rights to it. Their companies are American. They need the tick and flick to then send it across. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has written, "I'm writing to express the United States' full support for both the transfer of F-16 fighter aircraft to Ukraine and for the training of Ukrainian pilots by qualified F-16 instructors, and continuing that Ukraine will be able to take full advantage of its new capabilities as soon as the first set of pilots complete their training." So once the training is complete, the jets will go, and they'll go from there. Now, what we don't know, and this is more of probably a Perun question, again, Perun, really fucking nice guy and very, very knowledgeable, is how the logistics actually look for this. We know the logistics for fighter aircraft is huge, from having runways able to actually take off fucking planes. The maintenance crews are huge, nuts and bolts, ground time for the planes, maintenance, it is massive. So that'll be very interesting to see how that then all works. But as we know, Ukrainian officials have said that these jets are not expected until next year, or not even in the winter period. So it may be time to swing some of our $2.80 we have left over from our groceries from the high inflation into then Lockheed Martin stocks. This is not financial advice. Don't fucking sue me. But I thought that is interesting, that we will see these planes in the air within, I don't know, maybe the next 12 months. But once we see it in the air, then that is then confirmed. So I wanted to have a look as well over this Russian raid on the Turkish civilian cargo ship. Now, we did see this maybe 3 or 4 days ago, and we did talk about it here. So this is a Sukron Okan, the Turkish ship. And we come up here from the Russian helicopter, and we see then the chopper land, and the guys then, soldiers, then debust onto the chopper. Now, this ship in the background here has said to be struck again. Ukrainian sources are saying they did strike this ship only in the past few hours, but there's been no footage released yet. We don't know the damage, so maybe that'll be a tomorrow's video job. But we do see then these guys land on the deck. Now, can someone confirm what weapon this is? It looks very interesting to me. I'm not, when I was in the army, I say to people, like, I'm not a weapons guy. Like, I knew what I shot, and I shot at like targets and shit, but I don't know that much. If you asked me, like, what did even the weapon I shoot, what was the like effective range, I could tell you that things. But if you like ask me really like specifics about gas and this and that, I'd have fucking no clue. But what weapon system is there? Anyway, see them run across the deck. Some of the crew here with kneeling down with their hands on their head, coming down the side of the ship, and then make it up into the bridge. Now, if you want to watch this full video, I can show you this on my Telegram. I'll make sure I post it over there. Then they pie this doorway into the bridge, guys, hands on their head, as per normal. And then there is actually a conversation takes place in English. And this bloke here, who's one of the Russian guys, is basically just saying, like, why didn't you stop when we radioed you? Why didn't you stop at the warning shots? And then they had to then land on the ship. But it's nothing that interesting. They go over some paperwork and stuff from there. Now, more so, Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has done an interview with a Ukrainian journalist, Diana Pachenko. Now, Diana Pachenko, everyone loves to pick up, she's a Ukrainian journalist, you know, a lot of the pages on Twitter, but she is definitely Ukrainian, but more on the pro-Russian side, and she's definitely found herself in some hot water before with the Ukrainian authorities. So we have this article here, which is an older article. The SBU announces suspicion of pro-Russian journalist Diana Pachenko. The Security Service of Ukraine sent a message of suspicion to the pro-Russian journalist Diana Pachenko, and this was reported on facts from ICTV by the SBU. The suspicion was declared on the journalists for the production and distribution, in particular repeatedly and using the media, of materials that contains justifications for the armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. This is part of the criminal code. The sanction of this article provides for imprisonment up to 8 years with or without confiscation of property. The journalist must arrive at the main directorate of the Department of SBU on the 27th, 30th and 31st to receive a written notice of suspension, interrogation and other legal proceedings. And this is from Ukrainian media outlets. Now, I have this then translated across from here. So notice of suspicion and the summons. This part here is literally just what we spoke about the criminal offence under these articles of the Criminal Code of Ukraine for justifying the Russian Federation, justifying aggression from the Russian Federation, as well as the summons. Now we have this further article here from International Press Institute about Pachenko, declared suspect for justifying armed aggression. On the 24th of January 23, the SBU declared Ukrainian journalist Diana Pachenko a suspect of case of justifying armed aggression by Russia. Whilst residing in Ukraine, Pachenko had recently travelled to the Russian-occupied region of Donbass in unclear circumstances to film a video report, which she then published on her YouTube channel under the title From Kyiv to Donbass. In the video, Pachenko interviewed passerby and Ukrainian soldiers captured by Russian forces. She currently resides outside of the territories controlled by the Ukrainian government. Now, this is interesting here. So she doesn't live in territories controlled by Ukraine. So I'm unsure exactly what happened in that criminal proceedings or if she is somewhat still at large. And interviewing Lukashenko, that won't have helped with that. So I'm just going to read some quotes from the interview that I found fascinating that have been pulled out by multiple different outlets. But you can watch the interviews online if you'd like to see exactly what he has to say. But if you Ukrainians do not cross our border, we will never participate in this war, in this hot war, but we will always help Russia. They are our allies. If aggression against our country starts from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, we will respond instantly with everything we have. Speaking about possible Belarusian intervention into Ukraine, he says, against Ukraine, if it commits aggression against us, not only nuclear weapons will be used, we have something besides nuclear weapons. Now, in this, we do know that Russia did transfer some nuclear weapons into Belarus, but that they're still under the full control of the Russian Federation. Anyway, and we will not warn you that if you cross the red lines, we will strike at the decision-making centres. This will be done without warning. Its goals have already been fulfilled to date. Ukraine will never behave so aggressively towards Russia after the end of this war as it did before the war. Negotiations should begin without preconditions. This is a classic of any diplomacy. I think so. We need to sit down at the negotiating table and discuss everything. And Crimea and Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Luhansk. Everything there needs to be discussed. Now, everything Lukashenko says needs to be taken with a large spoonful, not just a grain of salt. But it is fascinating to hear him speak about this conflict and what his opinions are on this as they're seeing in. And on multiple occasions talk that Belarus could have involvement if Ukraine attacks or into Europe. Now, many have speculated and warned on a potential false flag in Belarus to then get them involved. Only on August the 4th, which is 2 weeks ago, the SBU, the Security Services of Ukraine, accused Moscow of planning to stage a false flag attack in Belarus to draw in them into the war. So they have written in their statement, Russia plans to accuse Ukraine of what they have done in order to try once again to draw Minsk into the full-scale war against our state. Now, the Belarusian military isn't ever going to contest NATO, but opening another front line on maybe the north of Ukraine on an already very stretched Ukrainian military could be very dire. That said, I don't know how the West would actually react to this. I digress from that. Let's have a look over the maps and see what is going on. So, of course, we have Ukraine in the centre, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 14, this being Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk. Now, I always go Romania, Poland, Belarus and Russia around here. Now, what I'm talking about is, of course, this is Minsk, the capital then of Belarus, and this is the Belarusian border against Ukraine. Now, Lukashenko also has said that Russian forces have used Belarusian territory to launch attacks into Ukraine. And of course, we 1,000% know that. We knew that from day one, but he has said it anyway. But what I'm talking about is if a front line were to open here. Yes, the Belarusian military is not going to do the Suwalki Gap across to Kaliningrad, another Russian territory. That's just not going to happen. You know, the Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia would wipe them off the face of the earth very quickly. An opening of another front line here could be very dire to stretch more forces out, even if not much success was had, even if it was just pulling down. And this is what we saw happen in Belgorod. This is what we saw when Ukraine crossed into Belgorod, was just trying to draw, like, they were not, these guys, these groups that went into Russian territory, they're not going to make it all the way to Moscow. They're not going to do a Wagner PMC. There's not enough of them, not enough heavily equipment, because we know Western kit can't be used there. But what it is an attempt to do is draw a lot of forces away, and that did work somewhat successfully, with the Chechens saying they'd deploy another 50,000 guys around there. Now, you can't just come up with people, you need to move people around. And I've always speculated this, that if Belarus just made some, like, push over here somewhere. Now, I know you've got to actually cross the border, but how would that actually go? Because a lot of troops would have to come out, and maybe then Russia could back off some stuff. I don't know. It's interesting to then talk about. But we're going to have a look over the maps. Now, I do say not that much has happened. So let's zoom in down here to the south of Kyiv, of course, in Robotyne. Now, today, this map updated about 12 hours ago. So let's step back, and we do see that Ukraine has made some more ground up into Robotyne here. But then we go onto the Ukraine Daily Map update, and we're in the wrong area. Let's scooch over into Robotyne. Between today and yesterday, we don't see any significant changes happening in and around here, but we do know that Ukraine is still forcing large, heavy battles into that space. So let's have a look over this. So this is Surak Map's map of this area, and he does say that there are fierce battles in here, but Ukraine is making ground to the south, but the fight for the town is definitely not over. Now, let's go to the east on this map, up into where we've seen Ukraine have the most recent success down near Staromorsky, and of course this is where Urozhany is. So let's step back to a day, and what we do see is this corner then get cut off down through there. So we do see Ukraine make some ground. We did see this advancement across Novodonetsky, but we haven't seen any change on that recently, but I think that could be interesting how that opens up, but mainly just that shift there. Now let's go to the east on then this map here. Excuse me for moving so slow. Now, Urozhany, of course. Now, we know Urozhany fell yesterday, and it shows the same thing, that this has come into contested ground and more Ukrainian held ground here, that was a large move there. The order of many square kilometres was then taken. So, here is Surak Maps, and Surak Maps does confirm this, of course, showing Urozhany is completely under Ukrainian control, and this cut off of the corner here. Now, the only thing I want to have a look on is how does this look against the fields here. Now, of course, it's hard with what ground is contested, held, whatever, but let's try and line some of this up. So we have this small rectangular paddock and this square paddock. So these are these two paddocks here, I believe. And it is showing that Russia still hold control up through here around to this intersection here, I believe. The Surak Maps is still saying that Russia do have control up through here, so this bit of like yellow square rectangle we can point out here, but that Ukraine did still have a significant advancement in that area. Now, on the Rybar Russian sources map, this also shows that Urozhany has been taken, and of course that the front line is more flat out here, showing different to both the Surak Map, Deep State, whatever in these areas. I wish we could get a bit more zoomed in and really look at the Rybar Russian sources down to paddocks, little movements like that. Like, at the end of the day, this is moving very slowly. Paddock by paddock, tree line by tree line, street by street. Matters a lot when we're talking about a war of attrition, a conflict like this. Now, across the Deep State map and the Daily Update map, we don't see any other changes. I'm somewhat waiting to see if the Deep State does update up in the northeast, up near Svatov region here, near Kovalivka, Novodany region, to see if it shows the same progression that the daily map, that the daily update map had maybe 3 or 4 days ago, but not yet. So of this Novodani region, let's just move south just to the north of Soledar. Now, excuse how slow this is. Australian internet's like the most expensive in the world and absolutely fucking sucks. I think we're slower than like Afghanistan. So here we have Rozalivka, Mykolaievka here. So let's go back, and we don't see any changes in this area, but Suryak Maps is showing that that Russia had a small advancement in this area. Now, where is this on this map? This is right here. We see in this intersection then of these tree lines come to these two small paddocks. These are these paddocks that they have pushed down to about just past this tree line in here, but doesn't show any update on that map or then the other daily map updates we have as well. Now, I have looked multiple times on both these maps, and the other advancements up near Vulshana aren't being shown on anything other than the Suryak maps and, of course, then the Rybar Russian sources. So we've talked a lot about this Vulshana area. This is what I'm calling it, or the Sinkivka area. So where then is this? This is more northeast from here, Kharkiv Oblast. So it's where this is. So northeast of Kupiansk. We know Kupiansk is incredibly important for the Ukrainian forces as well. And this is in here. Now, we have seen some ground made in here on these Western sources maps over the past few weeks, but nothing really day-to-day changing. So let's step back to the 11th, then through. We did see that major step up from there, but we're seeing a lot more happen in here, according to at least Suryak maps and some other sources. So let's bring up Suryak maps in here. So of course we've got Vulshana, Sinkivka here. So this is saying that Russia has pushed past this intersection here, this three ways here, we'll call it that they've pushed up here to the southeast of Sinkivka. That they're pushing right down along this tree line down here and then cutting back in at some point. They've taken a fair bit of ground here, as well as another push right down around this area here, I believe, which is very interesting. So we see where this just kicks down to the southeast. I believe this is that kick down in there, but I could be mistaken. But around this area and down here is being claimed by Suryak maps that is then taken by the Russian forces as well. And this is somewhat backed up by then the Rybar Russian sources as well, if not showing a little bit more. So we have Sinkivka here. This grey area is the outskirts of the city, so some of it is coming then into, it said, grey zone control. This isn't being shown across Suryak maps or, of course, Deep State, but that there is more of a push out from Vulshana, that the Russian forces are pushing out into here and trying to somewhat envelope Sinkivka here and showing more grey zone, of course, on then the western side. But again, that isn't being shown across any of the other maps, and we will wait to see how that actually looks for further updates, as we want, as you know, we want multiple different maps from different sources confirming these movements. But legends, thanks again for spending some time with me. I really do appreciate your support. If you'd like to support me further, there's links down below. But if you've got to this point in the video, please don't feel obliged. You've done bloody enough. Look after yourselves. Have a fantastic weekend. Maybe have a beer this Friday night. Not too many of them, but just enough to be happy. Enjoy yourself. Stay safe. I'll speak to you over the weekend. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.